Henry, when did you meet Boyd?
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah. Stephen K. Peeples here. It's February 8th, 2018. I'm with Henry Diltz, esteemed photographer and mutual friend of Boyd Elder, Texas artist, who is responsible for skull art like this.
And this.
And this. And Boyd is quite the raconteur. We've both known him for decades, going back to the 70s anyway. And so we're here to collect some tall tales and lies and maybe a couple of truths along the way.
Got some lies. Yeah.
about Boyd and Henry's exploits in LA and Hollywood and elsewhere. So yeah, let's take it from the top. Where did you meet him? What were the circumstances? Tell us that story.
Well, I met him right around the very end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. I don't remember if it was 69 or 70, but it was when I was working with Gary Burden, graphic artist.
Right.
And of course, Boyd is an artist, graphic artist, and a fine artist. But somehow Gary knew him, you know. And it was during that time when there was so much art going on, and Boyd was on the scene.
He was going to Chenard at the time, so
That's right,
or
he
had
did
just
go to
graduated.
Chenard, right.
So
I knew him after Chenard.
Okay.
Right. He was hanging out with Gary Burden, and you know, he'd be at Gary's house for dinner. I remember his brother came to town in a pickup truck, and I remember photographing the two of them. And remember the Texas license plate had a little star on it, and I collect star pictures. I thought that was great, you know. And you know, and then we had various shows and art shows, stuff with David Crosby, and you know, he had his big art show in Venice and several smaller shows around town. Then we were heavily involved with the Eagles, the Desperado shoot. He was one of the posse in the Desperado album cover shoot and video that we did. And then of course he did these fine skull decorations for another one of the Eagles albums, One of These Nights.
Yeah, it was One of These Nights was the first, and then the second was their greatest hits.
Right.
So when 75 and 76 respectively. But
so
that's several years before you met him. So we're still back in the late 60s, early 70s. This is 75 and 76.
Oh, okay, yeah, right. Well, I mean, the main thing about Boyd, I loved the decorated skulls. I thought that was just the greatest art that I'd ever seen. And he didn't do just that one that you're wearing and this one. He did about 5.
Right.
There was a horse skull, there was a buffalo skull, there were several cow skulls. And then he did a series of lithographs of all of those, which all of my friends in the rock and roll world bought sets of. I remember Dewey Bunnell from America's got some on his wall. And of course, Joni Mitchell had a set, and Don Henley, Glenn Frey, not only had a set of the lithos, but they had the original ones, which they bought. You go to Henley's house and he's got one on the wall. Joni had one on the wall, the actual original skull. So, you know, I greatly admired that.
That's pretty amazing. Well, let's go back to a couple of the events that you talked about a moment ago. Among the shows that you shot for him or with him or that he did was the Chingadero show.
The Chingadero show.
Venice.
The Chingadero show was the big show in Venice. It was at some artist's loft, a great big loft.
That was 72 sometime?
Somewhere around the early 70s,
okay, yeah.
And everybody was there, I was there taking photos, and the Eagles were playing one of their first gigs. They were standing in the corner playing Witchy Woman over and over because they didn't know too many songs. And there was a keg of beer that was leaking.
Uh-oh.
So they were kind of standing in the wet beer, and Joni Mitchell was dancing, you know, with the wet beer on her feet, and everybody was boogieing and dancing, and Mama Cass was there, and Ned Doheny, and you know, lots of the managers, David Geffen, and people like that, some movie actors, and just a ton.
Jackson Browne was there too, wasn't
he?
he?
Yeah, Jackson Browne was there. And at one point there was a great jam session with Jackson and Ned Doheny and and Joni and Mama Cass sitting next to each other singing, and Brian Garofalo, bass player, was there. Everyone had such a great time.
You know, Boyd says that was Eagles' first gig in front of people.
I think it was.
And he says they played 8 songs. They played 8 songs through, and then they started the loop, and they did that, you know, until the party was over. Basically.
I remember hearing Witchy Woman quite a few times, and it was really, really cool. Then there were some other smaller art shows around Hollywood. I don't remember specifically, but some smaller galleries had his stuff. I remember being there drinking lots of wine, and, you know, dare I say,
art receptions, yes.
Dare I say, pissing on the men's room walls.
Oh yes, we did hear about a couple of pissing contests. So okay, so tell us about the pissing off the pier story.
Oh yeah, there was a big show in New York that had Mouse, Kelly, who's the San Francisco artist that did the surfing stuff? I just forget his name.
Griffin?
Yeah.
Rick Griffin?
So there was, Mouse and Kelly.
Oh, he's from Texas.
Rick Griffin was there, and Boyd Elder was there, a couple other people. And I had my photos there, and it was a big show. A guy named Mutt from New York. Anyway, he was an art dealer.
And a promoter, I think.
A promoter. He promoted this big, in fact, they used my picture of the Doors, I believe, as on the poster for this thing.
The Morrison
Hotel.
Nice.
That was a black poster. And it was right on a pier, so right next to the water. And I remember at one point going outside of the actual room and pissing in the bay, you know. And a picture of Boyd doing that.
Well, you know, it was a drought.
Locked away, of course.
Locked away, yes. Never to see the light of day.
Yeah.
Until now.
Right. And I mean, you know, we had a lot of spontaneous fun. That's the thing about Boyd. He's very spontaneous and, you know, kind of carefree. And
absolutely. He's always wanting to be, at least the times that I've spent with him, he's always wanted to be moving.
Right.
He always felt like if he stopped, it's kind of like a shark.
Something like that, right.
You got to keep moving in order to keep living. If you're not moving, you're not living.
Yeah, exactly.
And for him to be in one place for any period of time, he gets restless. And
yeah. I remember seeing him at Joni Mitchell's house several times. They were very, very close friends.
They still are.
Yeah. And I remember one time up there, she had a rug that she made. It was a multicolored kind of a rug of many colors. And they had it on the ground, and she was at one corner of it. They were moving it around. He was on the opposite corner, and she had a little cat. And the cat, at one point, ran from her hands right diagonally across the center of the rug to Boyd on the other corner. And I got a shot of it. It was the blurry cat running. And Joni said, "That's the way our energy is, Boyd, from me to you." Just like that.
That really describes it right there.
Yeah. So Boyd will call you up at the oddest moments. You know, "Henry, Boyd, you know, what's going on, man? You know, I'm in town for a couple days, blah, 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 you know." Not blah, blah, blah. He'd say, you know, you pick up the phone. "Henry, it's Boyd. I'm in town for a couple days. What are you doing? Let's get together." So you never know when you're going to hear from Boyd. And then we also have Hawaii in common. His kids live in Hawaii.
Right.
And I lived in Hawaii for a long time. So he called me the other day from Hawaii, you know, just to say hello. He likes to keep in touch, and it's fun to keep in touch with Boyd. Gary Burden and I, my graphic artist, art director pal, we always wanted to do some kind of a film and put him in a film. He looked like a young movie star. He looked like, you know, Desperado was going to be, you know, or something out in the desert with Boyd.
He did have kind of an exotic, notorious kind of look to him, you know.
Kind of flinty, you know, Texas.
Flinty,
kind of, you know.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah. We were sure he was going to be a movie star, but man, time went by just like that. We never did it.
Bam. What happened? Well, you mentioned Gary Burden, and I remember one time hanging out at your place back in the late '70s at your other Studio City place. It was Gary, Boyd, you, and me.
Yeah.
Just sitting on a couch, smoking and joking, having a good time. There's this great photo of Gary and Boyd where they're just like embracing, like completely wrapped up in each other, like good friends. But
they were brothers, that's for sure.
So
we all were brothers.
They did a few. You guys did a few projects together, but the Desperado cover for the Eagles was probably the one that's best known. So,
right.
And there's like a whole story behind that, and you've told it to me before, but I would love to hear it again, further embellished with with the mists of time, right?
And we may have to wait till this plane goes over.
Yeah, we can.
It might fly right this direction and get louder.
Time for
and
tea.
louder.
Yeah, time for tea.
Time for tea.
Tea time.
Right. I lived on Colfax. Between Moore Park and Ventura in the 80s when I was working at Capitol, and we were right under the trajectory of the jets taking off from Burbank, so they'd be in their power climb.
It's going right over there right now, I think. That's right over there.
It's the power climb, and just the way that we were, the location where it would rattle the house. 7 in the morning, 7:02, 7:03, 7:04.
What?
Yeah. Listen to that. Boyd must be in town.
Yeah, no kidding. Another Desperado.
Right.
Well,
So,
while that's still screaming and we're not rolling, I just rebuilt my website with a development partner of mine, and it looks really good, basically.
StephenPeeples.com.
StephenKPeoples.com.
No dots.
No dots.
Stephen K.
Just
Peoples.
StephenKPeoples.com.
Okay.
And it's looking really good. So you
I gotta look at it.
Go check that out.
Yeah. So we're talking about the Eagles, Desperado.
Yeah. So let me reset that up.
Okay.
So you and Gary and Boyd actually did an album project together, an album shoot together. It was a Desperado project, Desperado shoot for Eagles, and there's great stories behind that. So
well,
please drop it on us. How did it come about?
Well, it was their second album, and they did this cowboy suite, and so of course the obvious idea was to do a kind of a cowboy, a Desperado looking cover. So I know Gary took them down to Western Costume and got them real cowboy movie outfits, probably stuff that John Wayne wore. And then they got real guns with blank ammunition, movie load ammunition.
Right.
Which meant extra powder and extra sound and extra fire and extra smoke, but no bullet, of course. And it got them all dressed up, and we went out to Agoura, where there was a rundown, sort of a derelict cowboy movie lot. They had a bank and a saloon and some wooden buildings that hadn't been used for years.
Perfect.
Probably in the 40s, they did some cowboy movies out there. And it was just like a ghost town. We went out there and we had 3 horses, actually 4 horses, because it began with them riding into town on these horses. And so the idea was that the Eagles were going to come into town, rob the bank, and all the roadies and managers and producers and Boyd were the posse. So we spent the whole day out there setting this up, where they come backing out of the bank with their guns blazing, and the roadies would be running down the street with their guns blazing in a big gunfight. And Jackson Brown was J.D. Souther, the songwriter. Jackson Brown and J.D. Souther were both among the gang with the Eagles.
Right.
There was a lot of grabbing breasts and falling on the ground, and it was really like kids playing cowboys.
Right.
But the thing was, when they finally started shooting, because we'd set it up first before we started shooting, the volleys, I mean, it was like 12 people all just firing, emptying their guns, and this big cloud of smoke slowly rose above this little ghost town in the Malibu Hills in Agoura. And I mean, a short time later, we heard fire engines. And all these big fire engines arrived. I mean, the neighboring people around there thought the hills were on fire, which of course is a very dangerous thing out there. So we had the fire department come. But so I was up on a ladder with my motorized Nikon in one hand, actually shooting the photos, but I had a Super 8 movie camera kind of waving around in this hand, just wasn't a plan really, but just I wanted to have movies of this thing happening. And it became a nice little black and white movie, which the Eagles now show behind their stage when they do the Desperado song. They show that movie.
Yes.
But Boyd was one of the gang, one of the posse, and he was on a horse. I think he was the only one on the horse when all the shooting started.
Probably the only one who actually knew how to ride.
Yeah, right. He looked so great. I mean, that's when we thought, we got to make a cowboy movie, but this guy is the star. He's like a young Clint Eastwood kind of a guy, you know. And he had a rifle, and he was on this horse, and God, it was so real.
He's probably
like
tapping into his grandfather's, you know, and his
Something,
forebears.
yeah. You know, it was 1972, but it could easily have been 1872. It was
Yeah.
a throwback, definitely a time warp.
Now, the photo that was used on the back cover, in the foreground, you have the dead eagles, basically,
Right.
just laid to rest in front of it. And
Like
then
so many jackrabbits.